to this meeting. I also have a transcript on as well. So that'll be accessed in the video afterwards. This deck has been uploaded to the Summit Resources site. So if you want access to that afterwards, feel free to grab it from the site. Also feel free to contact me as well. And I'll share my contact information at the end if you have any additional follow-up questions or would like to discuss this further. So my name is Rachel Nichols, and I'm the Product Manager of Marketplace Solutions at Unizin. In this role, I have the pleasure of working alongside Unizin's member institutions and vendor partners to scale digital course material ecosystems through technology. And over the last several months, we've spent time researching the challenges that higher education faces in scaling the adoption and fulfillment of digital course materials, and in particular, learning tools. Today, I'd like to share with you what we've learned through our research and how we envision solving these challenges. So first, I'll summarize the evolution of course materials from print to digital and from digital to learning tools. This might be familiar to you already, but I'd like to just set some context for the rest of the conversation that we'll have. I'll also describe a conceptual tool that we use at Unizin called the Digital Course Materials Lifecycle. And this tool helps us frame the challenges that are solved for digital content today as compared to those that go unsolved for learning tools. Next, I'll illustrate how the pandemic has accelerated learning tool adoptions and the impact that this has had on institutional IT, faculty members, and instructors. And finally, I'll share how Unizin envisions solving these challenges for learning tools by partnering with our member institutions and our marketplace vendors. The way that course materials are purchased, delivered, and consumed has evolved over the last several years. And this evolution has been influenced by a number of factors that impacted both publishers and institutions. As the cost of higher education increased, faculty members, instructors, and students looked to more affordable course material options. To address rising costs, publishers and institutions partnered to deliver digital course materials through what's called inclusive access. And for those not familiar, inclusive access enables faculty members and instructors to order discounted digital course materials, usually e-texts, that are automatically delivered to the students enrolled in their course. Inclusive access not only delivered student savings, but it also demonstrated the value of technology in the classroom. In ways that traditional course materials cannot, digital course materials can facilitate learning experiences through interactive components, engagement tools, and many of those features that, as was described in the keynote, generates data and helps us improve those learning experiences. So understanding this, publishers shifted their focus to their digital course material offerings. In July of 2019, for example, Pearson announced that it was transitioning to a product as a services model to be much more like apps, professional software, or the gaming industry. And as part of this transition, it was determined that all future releases of Pearson's US titles will be digital first. So to summarize, technology advancements and a number of other factors that you see here catalyze the evolution of digital course materials. When we talk about the evolution of digital course materials, we're typically referring to e-texts. At the same time, however, a trend has emerged where e-texts are evolving into courseware, leading to additional benefits and challenges for those or for supporting the use of these technologies in the classroom. In addition, learning tools such as discussion boards, participation tools, and homework platforms are also becoming available for instructional use. Starting as early as 1997, solutions such as Turnitin were entering the market. And over the years, we've also seen the introduction of homework platforms such as WebAssign, participation tools like iClicker and Top Hat, and courseware such as McGraw-Hill Connect in Macmillan Achieve. We also saw the introduction of video platforms like Kaltura, proctoring solutions such as Examity, and the modern learning management system that supports the delivery of these courseware and tools via LTI. In addition, platforms like Coursera and Unizin Engage offered new ways for students to engage with digital content. These learning tools support pedagogy in ways that might differ from courseware and e-texts. That being said, learning tools tend to be adopted by faculty members and instructors in the same way as other digital course materials. Additionally, these tools are typically consumed by students as part of a course. So we might think of courseware and learning tools as the continued evolution of digital course materials. Given this evolution, how has this impacted the way that faculty members, instructors, and students prepare for class? In addition to purchasing textbooks at the campus bookstore, students might also receive digital course materials. But before digital course materials can be delivered to students, there exist workflows and processes that must be completed first. At Unizin, we tend to think of this as the digital course materials lifecycle that you see here. When planning for their course, faculty members and instructors will search for, review, and compare digital course materials. And this might be thought of as the discovery phase. Discovery tends to be informal and is typically conducted by the faculty member or instructor themselves, but it might also be aided by instructional designers. As part of this phase, faculty members and instructors might browse online. They might meet publishers and vendors at conferences like we have today, and receive recommendations from their peers. Then when the time is right, course adoptions are submitted. Depending on institutional policies and procedures, adoptions might be submitted in a number of ways. If the material is available through inclusive access, the faculty member or instructor typically places an order through the institution's digital content program. For learning tools, they might submit a support ticket to institutional IT or contact the vendor directly. Once adopted, the material must be paid for and delivered to students for the right course by the first day of class. At Unizin, we tend to think of this as the fulfillment phase. If the material is available through inclusive access, students might be securely charged through their institutional bursar, and the material might be delivered through an e-reader experience. Unlike digital content, courseware and learning tools might require additional security, accessibility, and functionality reviews before the material can be fulfilled. Once these reviews are complete, the learning tool is typically installed into the LMS course. From here, the courseware or learning tool must be provisioned as part of the course setup process. And once provisioned, students might pay directly through the vendor's payment portal, or the institution might make the material available through an enterprise agreement. It is at this point, after all of these steps are complete that you see here, that adopted courseware or learning tool is available for the right students and in the right course. Courseware and learning tools are discovered, adopted, and fulfilled in the same way as digital content. Although the details might differ, where learning tools tend to have a little bit more complexity, the life cycle is the same. At Unizin, we offer marketplace solutions that enable institutions to scale the discovery and adoption of digital content and courseware through instructor self-service features and management tools. Faculty members and instructors can browse their institution's catalog year-round while they plan for their course. And then when the time is right, they can place orders for their adopted materials. Once an order is placed, faculty members and instructors can rest assured that students will receive those materials by the first day of class. At the same time, institutional administrators can determine the catalog items and offers that are made available in their marketplace. In addition to selecting from the Unizin catalog, institutions can also include digital content and courseware available through their own agreements. This way, faculty members and instructors can go to one place to adopt all of their digital course materials. Institutional administrators can also make changes to orders on the behalf of faculty members and instructors. By offering instructor self-service features and management tools, Unizin's marketplace solutions simplify the discovery and adoption process. Our marketplace solutions also enable institutions to scale the fulfillment of digital course materials through student self-service features and automation. Students can assert their choice to purchase digital course materials in the marketplace. And at the same time, institutional administrators can configure their student choice policies and manage choices on the behalf of students. Once choices are finalized, students can review their purchase history. From here, student billing and institutional invoicing are automatically reported, or they will be soon, and adopted digital content is automatically provisioned. This content is made available in the LMS course through Unizin Engage. Students who are entitled to access the content can do so by the first day of class. By offering student self-service features and automating these fulfillment tasks, Unizin's marketplace solutions streamline the fulfillment of adopted digital content and to some degree courseware. Where Unizin marketplace solutions exist to scale the discovery, adoption, and fulfillment of digital content, no such solution exists for learning tools. But does that matter, and how real are these challenges for learning tools? As digital course materials evolved, higher education institutions saw adoption steadily grow each year. Then the pandemic hit, and that growth accelerated in ways that were thought unimaginable only a couple of years ago, particularly for learning tools. But how much has adoption really grown? To answer this question, we gathered data from 7 Unizin member institutions using the Unizin data platform. For each institution, we counted the number of LMS courses adopting at least one LTI tool and called that an LMS course adoption. An LMS course adoption assumes that at least one of those LTI tools was either courseware or a learning tool. According to our findings, the average number of LMS course adoptions grew about 300% from fall 2019 to fall 2020, and about 135% from spring 2020 to spring 2021. In spring 2021, an average of 6,145 LMS course adoptions occurred at a single institution. Not only has the pandemic dramatically shifted teaching and learning over the last year, but there is also evidence that these changes are here to stay. According to an EDUCAUSE quick poll, 82% of respondents believe that there will be an increase or continuation of courses offered hybrid and online post-pandemic, and that faculty and instructors will continue to express interest in those forms of education as well. Learning tool adoptions have grown considerably in the last year, as you can see on this graph. And it is highly probable that adoptions will continue at the same rate or even increase in a post-pandemic future. So how has this impacted those that support the adoption of these tools? As instruction shifted online over the last year, institutional IT worked tirelessly to support this effort, and us at Unizin have been speaking with those institutions and really hearing about just the amount of work and effort that has been put into getting those courses online over the last year. In addition to teaching instructors how to use Zoom, IT administrators also supported the fulfillment of adopted learning tools. This might include confirming that the tool has passed security, accessibility, and functionality reviews, verifying that an enterprise agreement exists or who is paying for its use, and installing it into the LMS. This work existed pre-pandemic, but learning tool adoptions have at least tripled as compared to the previous year. In addition, our research suggests that this work tends to be manual and time-consuming, often involving the use of anything from spreadsheets to Google Drive, and in some cases, even the memories of IT administrators. According to an EDUCAUSE quick poll, the top workplace factor contributing to stress was additional responsibilities or an increased workload. And this could be related to a number of factors, but it's hard to imagine that a 300% increase in learning tool adoptions is not one of them, especially since this work tends to be manual. In other words, it seems clear that the pandemic-infused growth in learning tool adoptions is causing some pain for institutional IT. In parallel, faculty members and instructors also complete fulfillment tasks. When a learning tool is adopted, the faculty member or instructor must provision that tool for use in their course. The provisioning process varies for each learning tool, but it tends to be manual and typically occurs before course design can begin. In addition, the faculty member or instructor might also verify that students have access to the tool. Typically, this process requires a manual comparison between the LMS course roster and the learning tool roster, often using spreadsheets. And in the case that students aren't registered within that first week, the instructor might have to chase down those students and send a couple of emails as well. According to an instructor at Indiana University, these fulfillment tasks take about 1.5 hours per tool, and they can take much longer for certain courseware and learning tools. So remember how we discussed that about 6,000 LMS course adoptions on average occurred in spring 2021. Given 1.5 hours per tool, this means that faculty members and instructors spent, on average, 9,000 hours completing fulfillment tasks that term for a single institution. But it could be many more hours. When asked how he would otherwise spend this time if he could, our instructor said that it would give him an opportunity to work more with his students on a low stakes, establishing a relationship level, rather than feeling like he has to serve as their IT support. Based on our research over the last 8 months, faculty members and instructors are spending thousands of hours on fulfillment tasks in the weeks around the start of the term, where they would rather spend this time building relationships with their students. So what can be done? Earlier, we discussed how technology advancements and a number of other factors catalyze the evolution of course materials. From here, we determined that courseware and learning tools might be thought of as the continued evolution of digital course materials. We discussed the digital course materials lifecycle, which is a tool that we use at Unizin to frame the challenges that we solve for digital content today, as compared to those that go unsolved for learning tools. But are these challenges worth solving? At Unizin, given our research on the number of hours that instructors are spending, and that these adoption rates will likely increase or even at best stay the same, we think they are. As learning tool adoptions tripled over the last year, institutional IT was burdened with more work and less resources. And at the same time, faculty members and instructors were spending, again, thousands of hours completing fulfillment tasks. In addition, there is evidence that these learning tool adoptions, as I said, would continue at the same rate or even increase in a post-pandemic future. So our research suggests that the fulfillment of learning tools poses a critical scaling challenge for our institutions. Given that Unizin's marketplace solutions already exist to scale the discovery, adoption, and fulfillment of digital content, why not extend these same solutions for learning tools? So imagine a world where adopted courseware and learning tools are automatically fulfilled. And once adopted, those courseware and tools are automatically installed and provisioned for the right LMS course. At the same time, students automatically receive access to the right courseware and learning tools by the first day of class. In this world, faculty members and instructors spend the weeks around the start of the term building relationships with their students rather than acting as IT support. Additionally, institutional IT can support a diverse ecosystem of courseware and learning tools while still delivering the same exceptional IT support. At Unizin, we intend to solve these challenges and make this vision a reality. Our marketplace solutions can support the adoption of courseware and learning tools today, and some of our institutions are already doing so. By extending these solutions, we can automatically report course adoptions to vendors for the purpose of provisioning. We can also extend our existing solutions to enforce student access in the same way that we already do for digital content. By automating provisioning and access management through our marketplace solutions, we can solve some of the key challenges faced by institutions in scaling the fulfillment of adopted courseware and learning tools. And beyond this, we imagine continuing to invest in our marketplace solutions to facilitate more informed discovery and adoption, adding support for additional business and offer models, including enterprise, in addition to inclusive access, and improving our cataloging features and processes, as well as enhancing our marketplace management features. Our vision is to enable institutions to scale the adoption and fulfillment of any digital course materials available at their institution through our marketplace solutions. And by solving these key challenges of provisioning and access management first, we can begin to deliver on our vision. So I know that we have 50 minutes. That's the end of my presentation, but I wanted to leave some time for any additional questions or discussion that you all are interested in having. So now I'll open the floor to any of those questions. I might be interested in hearing, so through some of our research, and I know that some of those on the call are Unizin members, what challenges have you experienced in as those learning adoptions increase? Are you seeing increases in the number of support tickets? Like what experiences are you having as those adoptions increase? Hi, Rob. I see that you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
Well, I was going to, even though I'm not a member, I was going to try to answer your question. The challenge that our institution, particularly our business school, has experienced with increased adoption is, sort of defending equity issues, equity of access issues for students who either come from first generation or low income backgrounds, or who have an inequitable cost for them due to the existing combination of prior content agreements and other sort of transactional arrangements that our university and schools have made.
Absolutely. I think that the cost of digital course materials or course materials in general and affordability, especially, I mean, I think that this was a topic even pre-pandemic, but especially since the pandemic, is one of those challenges that I think can be challenging to solve. And Unizin, at least in its past, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with inclusive access or if you have a program at your institution, but that's been one of those ways that Unizin has come together to try to solve some of those challenges. And so I think that, and I can imagine that the same can be said for those learning tool and courseware offerings as well. In some cases, institutions might have those enterprise agreements, and so there's no cost to students. But it's also the case that in some instances, students might be paying for those themselves, and institutions might not even be aware of it if they're paying directly through the vendor portal.
We completely had that problem.
Yeah,
And it's a really unfortunate one.
absolutely.
I've always argued that Unizin's inclusive access program is good for the inclusion because it removes the need for a student to have a credit card, and that by using the Bursar bill or the U bill, it just opens up the possibility for students to use financial aid to acquire their learning materials.
Yeah, Vicki, that's a great point as well. And I think that we've seen the benefits of that for digital content and those courseware offerings as well, rather than students entering their credit card information, where institutions never see those purchases, or you don't have really oversight of the security of those types of payment portals. Having those payments go through the institutional bursar, which is typically done through inclusive access, we've also seen learning tool vendors, and we're having a couple of conversations around that as well, where they're interested in offering through that same model so that students can apply their financial aid, which is another benefit, absolutely.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We appreciate that too, that, you know, and that's a great, for us, when we talk to faculty, that's something they really like to hear, is that students can apply their financial aid. One other thing that we often talk with faculty about, especially with courseware, is that with us, you know, a student is charged for it, but only if they are at the last refund date for the class. So, you know, if a student drops the class prior to that, they're not charged for the courseware, which generally, if a student goes and buys it on their own, once they access it for the first time, they've bought it. If they drop the class, then, you know, they get nothing for that. So that also is a thing faculty are really interested to hear about as well. So.
You said you wanted to know about increased challenges and tickets. I mean, I can say from an accessibility standpoint, you know, we've seen a large increase in these tools, and, you know, we can't do anything about those, because instead of a standard textbook, when you talk about the digital learning tools like Connect and Pearson MyLab and a few others, those are completely different. I'd call them their own LMS in some aspects. I mean, they're entirely homegrown software products, and the traditional model that the DSOs are on, and my office is kind of bridging it, is that they just do the textbooks and they do the PDFs, right? When you start getting into digital tools used for the students, there's not enough support and knowledge to rebuild a vendor's tool. So that's one of the big things I see coming down the pike. And right now, those vendors are shielded from that, because if there is an OCR complaint, it comes to the school who adopted the tool, not the vendor. And we continue to try and have conversations with some of those vendors, and some are responsive and others, quite frankly, are not. So that's one of the big things that I've seen. I mean, we used to have 1 or 2 a semester. I think last semester we had 8 that required accommodation for a visually impaired student. So that, you know, from a support standpoint, you may not always think, you may just think about IT support, but we're also an IT function, and it's become difficult for us to work with those tools, especially as they're ingrained in the LMS.
Absolutely. And thank you for that contribution. I think that accessibility is one of those things where, as you mentioned, it's evolved rather than print textbooks that need to be converted into a format that any students who need an accommodation might need access to. Now that those courseware are becoming software themselves, and as you referred to them, they're almost like their own LMS. They have a course setup component. And I think that that's where the power of the consortium really comes in. We can, if we have that demand and we can aggregate it and say, look, like these tools aren't accessible for these reasons. And this is what really needs to be done and provided in that kind of format. We already leverage that to some extent today. But I think that what we've seen, particularly with the marketplace solutions and with the digital content and courseware flowing through that, it gives us that additional leverage. We also, and I know in past conversations have talked about, as we evolve what's known as Order Tool today into kind of that place where those materials are discovered, incorporating things like accessibility, ratings is kind of difficult. We've talked about, you can't really put this on a number scale, but describing who this might be accessible to when it comes to certain students and providing that information up front so that when those faculty members and students are, or sorry, not students, but when those faculty members and instructors are going to adopt their materials, they can see that information up front. That's something that might not be something that we do tomorrow, but as we continue to evolve our marketplace solutions, incorporating that type of information.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how open educational resources could be embedded at the time of discovery.
Absolutely, and thank you for the question, Lisa. With open educational resources, that's absolutely another form of digital course material. And the way that this has been incorporated to date is in those solutions, and I'll just go back to show you in the slides. These screenshots that you see are from Unizin's marketplace solutions. And in addition to publisher content, institutions can also incorporate those open educational resource offerings so that they can be discovered and adopted in the same way as publisher offerings or those vendor offerings that might cost the students some money. And so in the same way, especially for those open educational resources that tend to be that are content driven, we can deliver those in the e-reader experience when once adopted as well. And so that's something where, again, we imagine these marketplace solutions supporting the discovery and adoption of not only publisher and vendor content, but open educational resources as well. And in some cases, we also have institutions that generate their own content and want that to be discoverable. And so that can be incorporated here as well. Does that answer your question?
It does. I see too, my one of my colleagues has mentioned, are you planning to offer the option to allow faculty to discover library licensed content within the marketplace tool?
That's a great question. And this is something that Unizin has come back to time and time again regarding library licensed content. It's a little bit more challenging than open educational resources and publisher content because you need the metadata around that. But we do have it on our radar as something to incorporate. Again, as part of our vision, we imagine faculty and instructors coming to this tool to adopt anything at their institution, and that would include library content. We don't have it on our roadmap today, but it's something that we know is important, especially around affordability and those like really valuable resources to include. And so I haven't really been paying attention to the chat. So coming back here, So Michael, you asked, with the increasing amount of software tools being added, how do we envision support? And you imagine students being sent all over. Can you elaborate on that
Yeah.
question?
Yeah, I actually, in this talk, I started thinking about that. I mean, one of the big things that's can become problematic is as universities start to adopt all these different digital learning tools from these thousands of publishers. I mean, when it was a textbook, there's not a whole lot of support there, right? The textbook opens, and if it's printed right, you're good. But as we move, if we continue to move into more and more digital adoptions, our single point of contact desk for our students, that experience is going to start getting a little crazy, because if they can maybe do a very cursory check of that student's computer, and then they're going to start punting them depending on which tool it is. I could see them punting them to a different relationship. Oh, well, you need to talk to Pearson about that, or you got to talk to McGraw-Hill about that, or you got to talk to Lucid Chart about that. And then, that becomes extremely frustrating from a student perspective. I mean, there was a talk a couple of weeks ago that I attended where a student showed their screen, and they had, 12 different tools that they had to use in the course of just working through their education program. And now on top of that, if each one of these digital learning tools starts get pulled in, there's just going to be a support nightmare, I could see, from a student's perspective. So do we have any kind of ideas on how to consolidate that, or how that could be managed through Unizin, or how we're going to leverage that or manage that at the university side?
That is a really great question, and I think a very challenging one to answer as well, but I'll do my best. So I think the question stems from, with all of these digital course material adoptions, there are not only are adoptions increasing, but the number of tools available are being adopted is also increasing. In the example of this student, 12 tools. I think that part of the challenge is that right now there is no one place where those adoptions are submitted. So there is no source of truth in terms of all of the tools that are being used at a university or an institution, and what students are using what tools. So I think that adds to that support challenge, where if students are using a tool, do they contact their institutional IT? Do they ask their faculty member? In many cases, they already are. That's what we heard from our research at Indiana University. And who really is responsible for answering and facilitating those questions? And I think that, at least based on some of our research, our understanding is that institutional IT wants to be part of those conversations, or maybe it's the accessibility office that wants to at least be part of those conversations and facilitate it. And so we imagine that if all adoptions are happening in one place, and we can communicate those to the right people, whether it be the accessibility office or institutional IT or the vendors, to be proactive about that. So maybe we can communicate those adoptions much sooner, rather than the day before the term starts, maybe sooner in that process, so that every department or organization that's part of that process can be involved. And then we can also streamline that communication once the adoption is made, letting institutional IT know, letting the accessibility office know if they need to be made aware of that adoption, if a student who's in the classroom needs an accommodation. The Unizin marketplace solutions incorporate that LMS and that SIS data. So from the point of adoption, if we have those student enrollments, we can provide that information. I think that as well, from our conversations with those vendors, they're facing these scaling challenges in the same way. And so they're very much interested in participating to help streamline these processes and make it easier.
And I
Does that
wasn't
answer your
talking just,
question?
yeah, I wasn't talking just straight from an accommodation perspective. I was
Yeah.
an old help desk manager from a previous life. And so I always think about those kind of questions too, is like how, from a student perspective, plus I teach. So from a student perspective, I'm very sympathetic to where am I getting directed for support, and what happens when the publisher blames Canvas blames the publisher, those kind of things. happen. And I want to make sure that, as we continue to bring more and more people into this agreement, that we are very cognizant of how support creep could happen.
Absolutely. And I think that makes a lot of sense as well. With right now, at least our understanding is students don't have one place to go. Same is true for faculty members and instructors as well. They might submit a support ticket to their favorite IT person. They might, whoever it may be, and then it needs to be routed. Or in the case of students, are they contacting the vendor or are they contacting someone else? And I think that raises a really good question. How can we direct those questions to the right people and make sure that maybe institutional IT is involved to facilitate that, where maybe the students aren't responsible for that? I'm not really sure, but I can see how, as we incorporate and kind of consolidate these adoptions in one place, from a Unizin perspective, we can at least empower institutions to have that information so they know what tools are being adopted, and then maybe at least facilitate and participate in those conversations.
Yeah, at least some kind of handoff, because we've already been in situations, not even just an accessibility perspective, where a student got bounced around, and then I had to escalate it. So that's my big fear. The more and more we get there, and some organizations are better about support than others. So, but as long as, that's one thing we're going to have to start thinking about, is how do you make sure you have those relationships where if a student reports something to the support center, it goes to the right people. And that would be the fear I would see with the amount of stuff we're adopting.
Yeah, absolutely. In the case that students are being bounced around, is your feeling that that tends to be because students are reaching out to the vendor directly? Is institutional IT always involved in those conversations, or what does that look like from your perspective?
It depends. The situation we had, the student reached directly out to the vendor. The vendor pushed it. Actually, this was even weirder. The vendor pushed it to a publisher. The publisher pushed it to the LMS, and then it just kept going. And finally, we stepped in and said, "Okay," and we got our people on the phone with the right people, and we got it resolved. But a lot of times, I think it's the students are told to contact the vendor, McGraw-Hill for support, or Pearson for support, and then they'll come back and say it's not us. And as long as and once they say it's not us, where's the student go?
Right.
I mean, there's the added complications. The students are sitting on their own machines, so, but then we can direct them to a computer lab if that's the case.
Yeah, so it sounds like in those cases, students are reaching out to the vendor, and maybe it's sometime later after the student maybe already has been bounced around a couple of times, that institutional IT or central IT or whoever should be involved, the support center, catches up and is able to kind of step in and intervene for the student. And is that the right experience, or should maybe institutional IT be involved up front, or at least be made aware of that?
Yeah, and depending on the level of integration, the student may not even know they're in a different tool. They'll just know they're in Canvas.
Exactly. Right.
I'll just chime in on that same topic. Jeff from Minnesota, we require when we vet a tool that there's a knowledge-based article that points them to either the vendor or to a group of people that are going to support that tool. But you talked about the experience. Oftentimes it's hard for the help desk to intervene, or people at the central IT to intervene, because it really is a black box to them. Without the license or whatever, you can pretty much just point them to wherever the support is, unless it's a centrally adopted tool. And so would the vendors be willing to somehow allow central IT help desk people to help support those tools if they wanted to be involved? I think that could be changed, but I don't know what that would mean for the vendors to provide those help desk licenses so they could kind of be part of the team, so to speak. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really challenging question. I think that what I'm hearing being described is by the time that a tool is adopted and students start using it, of course, we want those students to have the best experience in the case that something goes wrong. And something always goes wrong because it's software. And so what should that experience look like? Should students reach out to the vendor, or should institutional IT be involved? And to what extent can those departments actually help? I think that, and I can imagine that vendors are experiencing these scaling challenges in the same way. I can imagine that the support that they're being asked to provide is only increasing in the same way that we're seeing with these adoptions increasing. And so I think that raises a great question. Can or should any of that burden be shifted to those IT departments at institutions to provide at least that first level of support? And I think that would require an ongoing conversation with those vendors to see, is this, what are the pros to that? Like, how would that help? And that's something I've made a note of as well, to reach out to our vendor partners and see what that might look like. So we do only have a couple of minutes left. I'm not sure if I've addressed all of the questions in this chat. So Vicky, you added that regarding support tickets, you have seen an increase, but the codeless provisioning that happens with inclusive access really takes care of most of the support tickets and instructor time involved in the first day of class. And I couldn't agree more, especially with that digital content and courseware, where we've heard, at least from those conversations with instructors, is for Top Hat, for example, that isn't flowing through Order Tool or Unizin's marketplace solutions today, and other courseware like that. If we go back to some of these previous slides, when we think about, oh, if I can move this. When we think about learning tools, or we think about digital courseware, what are we thinking about? And usually that is the digital textbooks or the courseware that's offered by publishers. But as we know, as courseware evolves, and we heard from the keynote speaker today, that those tools that are interactive, that are adaptive to student learning, that support adaptive homework solutions and things like that, these are becoming integral in fostering like that learning experience. So how can we support these and streamline these processes of adoption and fulfillment in the same way that we already do for our digital textbooks and our courseware? So we are at time. Are there any last questions before we go? All right, well, thank you all so much for participating in this session. Feel free to reach out to me at rachel.nichols@unizin.org. If you're interested, I'll go ahead and post that in the chat. For any additional questions, or if you have anything that you'd like to discuss. Thank you.
Thanks.